Hey guys, and welcome back to another installment of the PS Journals podcast. This week's episode is a very exciting one for me. It's all about what animals have taught me out in the bush, and animals to not take for granted pretty much on safari. But before we get into it, like always, this week's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Kudu. Now, Kudu has been a personal brand of mine, a camo brand of mine that we started a couple of years ago together with Cody. Since then, we have developed and just been constantly doing a whole bunch of research to try and get the perfect camo brand for not only hunters, not only fishermen, but outdoor enthusiasts, dads. I visualized this brand of being a brand of camo worn alongside the rugby field, chasing after your 9-year-old kid down the field, and just representing single dads, young men across all different walks of life. And yes, we are bringing out kiddies rangers, we are bringing out female rangers, but for me personally, it was just all about that smell, that touch, that feel, that look that I used to get when I used to do things with my father. My dad was an avid fisherman, so whenever we used to pack our fishing gear and get ready to go down to the rocks and all that sort of stuff, for me, it was all about the feel, the smell, the way that all made me feel. And that's essentially what we wanted to try and reflect back into a camo brand. And when Cody came out a couple of years ago, we spoke about this and we heavily brainstormed it, and he had the same sort of feeling and attachment to a camo brand that was going to be represented out there, not just in hunting or fishing, but every single day. Somebody that could wear a camo brand with a little bit of identity and walk out there looking stylish, feeling good, part of the active community, part of the outdoor community, just part of everyday walk of life. So we brainstormed, came together. Since then, it's been a whole bunch of product testing. What I'm wearing right now is the new rayon line. It's rayon fabric, so it's 45% rayon fabric and 55% polyester. So it gives it the stretch, but also it gives it, you've got that comfort. For me, who sweats quite heavily out in the outdoor activities space, this is perfect because it doesn't hold odor in and it dries pretty quickly. So I have been ultimately impressed with how far we have come with the development range. We launched our pre-order section last month, and within a couple of days it was completely sold out. So I did the pre-order side just to see what sort of traction I could get in the outdoor space or in the community of hunting and everyday walk of life, and the response has been unbelievable. We bought in 150 units and all of them, like I said, were sold out in a couple of days. So I'm truly grateful for all the amount of support, and we're really looking forward to launching this brand. It's been postponed a couple of weeks in advance, and it just keeps moving the date. We are struggling with a little bit of logistical activities, but we'll get to the bottom of that as soon as possible, just so that we don't want to launch something without being 100% prepared, and logistics is one of them, and making sure that we've got sufficient stock holding is also another. So we're not going to just go out there and launch a brand and then hopefully in a month or two that everything gets sold out. No, we want to hold at least a 3-year plan in place so that we can make sure that the product is constantly there for supply. So yeah, Kudu, new sponsor of this week's episode of the podcast. Without further ado, without me waffling on, I've waffled on now for about 4 minutes, so let's get into the podcast. Hey guys, and yeah, like I said, animals that have taught me so much in my hunting career. I've been very fortunate, and I've said this a number of times, I've been very fortunate to have learned from older generational professional hunters that have done this all before many, many times, but done it authentically, organically, and the best way they possibly can. And like I said a couple of weeks ago, there's no right or wrong to the hunting world, but everyone has their perception or perspective on how things should be done. But in the same breath, they also have this emotional attachment to, okay, well, I hunted a kudu this way, let's keep going this way, and I should supply this advice to the next professional hunter, and it might not work out for them. But in saying that, there are a lot of tips and tricks you can take from those individuals that have done that all before. And it's very, very important to hold on to those tips and tricks that you have learned from that individual. And for me, a lot of the time, it comes from fellow professional hunters. But for most of us, I think the experience and the learning curves come from hard lessons out in the bush. And what I mean by this is that losing animals, unfortunately, it is my personal opinion, it's probably one of the worst aspects of what we do, is losing a wounded animal. For me, it's heart-wrenching, it's demotivating, it's just one of those battles that you have to try and overcome in your head, especially if it happens pretty early on in a safari. It's a very bitter pill to try and get over. I've learned now how to bottle my emotions and deal with it a little bit later. But also it's lessons that it's a very difficult balance of taking that emotion, learning from it, and making sure you don't make the same mistake, or understanding what that sort of animal behavior meant and trying to rectify it on the next one. You don't always want to hear that, because you want to be able to find that animal and ethically take it away. But it doesn't always work out like that. And it's a sad and harsh reality of what we do, but it is part of it. And we need to understand that. But I'll do another podcast on how wounded animals affect professional hunters, clients, and all that sort of stuff. It is in the schedule, so yeah, we'll get into that. But starting off, a lot of us remember certain animals. A lot of us remember how animals reacted in certain moments. So for me, I'm going to list, how many have I got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, and number 5. I've got 5 animals that I believe, when preparing for this podcast, that I believe taught me so much. And I am going to mention specific hunts in this, because I think it's relevant to always boil back to, or always refer back to, a specific hunt that this taught you that moment on. So first up is a Cape eland. Now, to put everything into perspective, both the stories I'm about to mention, I lost these animals, unfortunately. The one we found a couple of days later, and the client was fortunate enough to leave with the skull. But unfortunate, we lost the carcass, we lost the trophy, or the skin and everything else like that. So my first one that I want to talk about is, was Lynn, and I think her name was Mary Beth. Lynn and Mary Beth came out. Trophies weren't high on their priority list. And so what we tend to do is look for the perfect cull animals. Now, it's either going to be a bull that's all broken down, terrible genetics, something like that, or we are going to sit with older females that are well past their prime, and if they do land up breeding, chances of them losing that calf is pretty high. I know wild animals are a little bit more resilient when it comes to that sort of stuff, but for us, choosing the old females, getting rid of them, that's how we were going to navigate through this cull period. So Mary Beth got into this herd of eland, unfortunately placed a very good line shot, but a little bit far back. So what we assumed, it pierced one lung and it got into the gut. tracked the herd. We didn't find any blood, not a single drop of blood. But one of my trackers picked up that there was one of the eland in the herd had split her hoof quite badly when she was running, anticipating that it was a wounded animal. Now, generally speaking, we like to focus on small details like that, but again, we tracked it for must have been about 100 yards, and not a single drop of blood, not even gut contents, nothing, absolutely nothing. So for us, it became extremely frustrating. So anyway, we got to a point where I felt good on the shot, the trackers felt good on the shot, meaning that it was a hit. But all our tracking abilities, we never picked up any sort of signs other than that split hoof signaling. Now, instead of backing around and getting to a vantage point and glassing down on the valley below us where we were hunting these animals in, we tended to back off a little bit, go back to the lodge, and reassess what had just happened. And after many conversations at the lodge and with fellow professional hunters around, we came to the conclusion that maybe it was a miss. Maybe I'd heard something else. It was a close range shot. We were looking at about an 80-yard shot. So we hunt with suppressors. I always hunt with a suppressor on. And I just said the only confusing thing for me is that I'm so confident that that was a hit. Anyway, we made the call. We weren't going to pursue this animal anymore, and that it was wounded. It was not wounded, so there was no hit, meaning that the client didn't pay or anything like that. A couple of days passed, broke down into the similar valley that we were hunting in. We picked up on the same eland herd, looked through them, and the story unfolded that, wait, hang on, there's nothing that's wounded there. So, okay, it was a miss. But one of the trackers pointed out to me and said, listen, that female's not there. And you could see her from a mile away. She just had different horn length, different horn character. She had a much more battered up skin. And I started questioning myself. I was like, yes, well, if she's not there, then what are the chances that she's lying down in the valley below? Subsequently, how everything would unfold, it was a group of impala, which was one of the species that was on the list. We broke down in and started stalking these impala. And while stalking, we came up on this female that had passed away underneath a tree. She had already started rotting. The bush pigs or jackal had got to her already. And my heart sank because we came up on her first before the clients did. And immediately in that, you as a professional hunter feel a sense of failure. Feel a sense of failure that you failed the client, the landowner, or the outfitter, but you kind of failed yourself because your gut instinct was telling you one thing, but you went on opinions of others. And although they weren't there to give you the best advice, you kind of use that as reassurance that, yeah, it didn't quite work out how your gut is telling you it did. Meanwhile, you should have just trusted your gut instinct. So what is the moral of this particular hunt? Well, I should have spent more time in the field. And since that day, that is one of the things that I have constantly done. Every single time you want to call a hunt or you want to call on a wounded animal, I kind of say, okay, well, if I'm at this point, I've got to put in another 2 hours just to make sure. And if it gets to that point where it's extremely hot or uncomfortable weather conditions or whatever the case may be, I will always go back to the lodge, reassess my position, come back and re-look and put out markers, a pile of rocks or something like that, just to make sure that I rectify where or I pick up from where I left off. So that is one of the things for me that I always try and do better on, if that makes sense. And now I'm going to mention Cody's hunt. And if you guys haven't yet, it is a YouTube episode, so go out and check it out. Myself and Cody got into position on a group of eland. We got to a vantage point and everything just really worked out. Pinpoint accuracy. However, this bull had broken away from the herd. So my initial plan was to send my trackers around on our vantage point to a point where they would have been closer to the eland bull and somehow not spook the eland bull, but somehow just get the attention of the eland bull so that he would shift around the valley side along the rock face that we were sitting on and come past us. Almost like a beaten or driven hunt, but not in a sense that you're gonna drive the animal towards it. Just so that I anticipated that was the feeding path, and that was you could see quite clearly that there was a path of animals that would run along just below us. Yeah. Anyway, everything worked out. Pinpoint accuracy. Trackers got into position. The eland saw them, and it sort of like got into a trot. And those of you that have seen eland before have those big hooves slapping around on the ground, trotting around. And as they came past us, Cody was in position, and I don't think he anticipated the speed of the animal. So also a placed shot a little bit far back. But I was extremely confident. If you go and have a look at the footage on YouTube, you could see quite clearly that it was a great shot. It was an exceptional shot. A little bit far back, but the accuracy of it was in line. Anyway, got into position, try to calm the whole situation down, thinking that this animal took the shot. You can see how the animal reacted, that it knew it had been shot, and it headed up onto the hillside just to the left of us. Try to calm the situation down because my trackers were fired up, Cody was fired up, we were going to go rush in, put in a second shot, and I was just trying to calm the situation down, trying to get the guys into a better position where we could see the animal and concentrate on the animal, and that way we wouldn't lose it. Because I was pretty certain that we needed to put in another shot just to make sure. Anyway, get into position. We see the bull. Put the sticks out. Unfortunately, we weren't quick enough on the sticks, and the bull saw us and headed down into hence the exact same valley that we lost the previous one on. So I left my trackers on the one hillside where they had spooked the animal, watching down into this valley, and me and Cody swooped around anticipating that it would come out on the other side. While inside the valley, the bull did a complete 360 and went past the trackers on the other side. Now, trying to implement the lessons I learned previously, I waited, I put in a lot of work, we sussed, we walked, I can't tell you how many hours. It was days, 2-3 days of us tracking this animal. Because if you look at the video, it's a beautiful specimen of eland to try and recover for the client. And like I said, Cody, up until that point, had an exceptionally successful hunt. And yeah, it was just something very, very special that would have made the safari that much sweeter if we had recovered that bull. But unfortunately, got into the thick stuff and we just couldn't track it from there. And I'm shooting with 180 grain Hornadies with ballistic tip, which I was hoping would dump enough energy in that animal to it later succumbing to those injuries. But after closer evaluation of the video footage and everything else, I just kind of came to that conception that it was a little bit further back than expected, and that possibly the bullet had whistled through and didn't dump any kinetic energy inside there. I could be wrong, but that's just my personal observation on what actually had happened. And yeah, we lost a beast of an animal. So what were the lessons that I learned there? Never take anything for granted, even though your first initial perception is that it was a good shot, and later only finding out that it was a little bit further back than what expected. So never take those sort of things for granted. Always try and get a follow-up shot, especially on the bigger animals, and really just trying to get into better positions, react quicker, and plan accordingly. But never give up. Never give up. Cool. Animal number 2, black wildebeest, the adrenaline enemy. There's a saying that goes around camp that the more lead you put into a wildebeest, the stronger it becomes. And I've seen this on a numerous amounts of occasions. But the one lesson that worked, that I learned from, was Len Otto. Was it Otto? No, Len. I can't remember his surname now. Anyway, it was very early on in my hunting career, and we got onto a group of black wildebeest, and subsequently it was a bachelor herd. We maneuvered ourselves through like these acacia trees, because those of you that know, black wildebeest like the open plains. But it wasn't Otto. It was Len or Leonard. One of the two. He was a German client. He wanted a trophy black wildebeest. Got to the end of the acacia trees. Everything had set out nicely. The black wildebeest, those of you, some of them, like, there'll always be that aerial bull or aerial female that will just constantly be standing looking for danger. The rest of the herd was bedded down, lying in the tall yellow grass. Get to the end, and the bull that we wanted was standing up broadside, perfect shot, 120 yards, and Len throws this bullet at it. Poof, hits the animal down, and all we hear is the death bellow. Ah! Now, early on in my career, I thought that was huge success. No, turned to the clients, high fives all around, excitement. It was a beautiful stalk. Took us about an hour and a half to get into position. Everything worked out according to plan, until we turned around, looked at the animal, and it got up and set sail. Absolutely flew, not leaving behind a drop of blood, not leaving behind anything. We had scouted several different valleys, spent hours on end searching for this animal, and we could not find it anywhere. Get back to lodge that night, and of course we have to reassess what positions we are in. Look around, come up with all different scenarios, and what we kind of boiled it all down to, that on a black wildebeest, there's about 4 or 5 inches below the mane that is no man's land, and it's pretty much like cartilage. There's not even vertebra there, there's nothing. And we, assuming that's what it hit, stunned the animal. That's where we heard the big bellow, the and all the whole performance, kicking legs, dust up, everything going. And only to find it would get up and tell us a big thank you and tell us off, and cheers. We'll never see that animal again. That animal wouldn't succumb to its... from what I've heard and what I've seen in the past, it wouldn't come to its injuries, because you hit in that no man's land, that cartilage area. There's not a lot of blood vessels there, so everything's just straight pass through. And lesson learned. When that happens, don't ever take it for granted. It's an animal that humbles you. It's like I said, the more lead you put inside of it, the stronger it gets. And I've seen this on many, many occasions. And those shots that are perfect, I mean, we chased... There was one scenario on a black wildebeest where a client came into camp. They were culling these animals. They culled the black wildebeest. They shot a black wildebeest. They wounded it, shot its front leg off. Or not off, but shot in its, just high on its shin bone. 4 months later, that animal was still running around, and eventually we picked up on it again, and my client managed to put it to bed. So we've seen it all with black wildebeest, and I'm sure there's many stories out there of hunters being humbled with their adrenaline chase too. Number 3 on the list, bushbuck, my favorite animal. And it's my favorite animal because of the amount of respect I've built up for this animal. One particular story comes to mind. I must try and think who we were hunting. Yes, what was his name? Anyway, we had an exceptional hunt. That night he shot a bushbuck. I'm trying to think of his name. Shame, it was the hunter that was with Cleo when she died. Cleo was one of my Jack Russells, and during this hunt, we had shot a zebra. Try to get back to lodge as quickly as possible because it was warming up to try and get the meat into the cooler room. And my little dog jumped off the back of my truck, and unfortunately I rode over her. So yeah, that was a heartbreaking moment, but a lesson learned. The bushback. So we get into position. Now, we've been after this animal for about 4 or 5 days, and shooting animals in between, but bushbuck was our main focus for those 4 or 5 days. Got into position numerous amounts of times, but the one time that really humbled me was we set everything up. Vantage point, open grasslands. Now, the coastal bushbuck behaviors are one I still don't quite understand, because midday you would just find bushbuck everywhere. Like midday, heat of the day. Normally, your Kumcha, those sort of inland areas, you would hunt them early morning, late evening, pretty much like a kudu. But not in the coastal areas. Coastal areas, we were hunting them, from 11 o'clock onwards, which was strange for me, and a little bit, I had to adapt to this. Anyway, get into position, see this bushbuck ram. Now, there's kind of like a triangle-shaped formation of trees. So if the bushbuck had fed into this bushline area, it would have cut. I'm trying to explain this for the guys that are listening to this. Cut the top of the triangle to come out on the other side into the other grassland areas. So we break down. Now I'm anticipating he's going to cut that triangle, break down, get into position, waiting for him to appear on the other side. So he breaks on the radio now to my tracker, breaks into the bush line, and we wait. Eventually it starts getting dark. I'm like, yes, this thing's not coming out. So literally veer ourselves towards the top of the triangle, and my tracker gets me on the radio. It's like he's back in the initial part of the ridge, or of the grassland area. So he had come into the triangle, kind of done like a U-turn, and come back out into that same grassy area. And now I was confused. I was baffled. But that's just a quick lesson of how unpredictable these animals can be, because once we got into that bushline area, you could see the paths inside the bush where not one of them is a direct path. Every single one of them is crisscross lines. And yes, I understand there's plenty of different bush-dwelling animals over there, or forest-dwelling animals like your blue darker and all that sort of stuff. But the lines that just were inside that bushveld was very, very hard to predict. So leaving my tracker there was probably a lesson that or instinct that I had kind of picked up, and I was hoping would work. But the reason why I left him there was for him to tell me when he was coming out of the other side of the triangle. So yeah, the lesson in this one is that try and plan your hunt accordingly. Try and have the more vantage points you have by putting out your trackers along different vantage points. For me, it's just always, it's slowly become part of my arsenal attack, part of my strategic planning is to try and get different people into different vantage points for us to have the best possible opportunity. And later that night, that evening, we managed to move ourselves into position, and there he was in the grassy field that we had saw him in the very first area, in the very first time of the stalk, and we managed to put in a beautiful shot. And hence I always boil back to that hunt, and I was like, okay, well, for the first 4 days of us hunting these animals, this is why it didn't work, because my anticipation, my understanding of how this was all meant to unfold was nothing like I anticipated or predicted. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So by the time I had learned my lesson, I realized, okay, putting out these different vantage points, putting out my trackers to make sure that it gives us the best possible opportunity, was probably the smarter move and best way possible. So learn from that, learn the respect, learn the craft. It helps you in the long run. Next one is kudu. Pretty much similar scenario. So, but the one nice thing about it is if you catch kudu in the rut period, generally speaking, he's always going to be hanging around females, and to pick up on those female herds is a lot easier than anticipated. But with saying that, I always still believe that big bulls are very territorial, and would like to keep their females relatively in the same area. So if you spot a big bull, okay, a good friend of mine, I've said this numerous times on this podcast, a good friend of mine said to me, he said, Dylan, when it comes to spiraled horn animals, it's 90% planning, 10% luck. And I've always lived by that. I've always learned from that, and I've always understood that, and I've always wanted to take that forward when hunting these animals, and it's worked for me since I've done that. My intense planning, but you can see it frustrates my clients immensely, because what happens is I will see a nice kudu bull, big spiral. I've got so many stories about kudu, big spiral, nice hooking forward, ivory tips, whatever you want to call it. And I'll be like, okay, that's worth looking at, and that's worth going after. But he might not be in the best possible position. And you'll always have those clients. Zach did it to me. Zach, if you're listening to this, I still don't forgive you for that, but you did get successful. Is that, oh no, we must just jump in here and go this way, and it will all work out. For Zach, it did, because they pursued it, and they not pressurized, but they pursued it and never gave up on their ability to get to that animal as quickly as possible, and it worked. But for me, it's all about planning. It's all about strategic planning, getting yourself into better positions, because if something does happen, you will always have a plan B, plan C on that scenario. Hence why I say putting people out, glassing out, so if it is a bad shot, they would be able to pick up where that kudu bull went, and all these different scenarios, right? But generally speaking, for me, if I see a nice kudu bull on a hillside chasing a bunch of females, I'll always note time of day. So I'll always look at my watch, in my truck, or on my hand. I'll make note of it, and then I'll start referencing different points of what I've seen. So where he is, what he's feeding on, and then are there any vantage points above him? What is the best angle of approach, and which other way I would maybe make myself available, make himself available to me. How will he move? How will he feed? Because he's constantly chasing the females. So you don't watch the bull himself. You're watching the females and how they move and how they stay aware and how they anticipate the scenarios. So this instance, it was Mark Davy, I think his surname was. Yeah, I'll put a picture of him up here now. And what a very, very special hunt. The gentleman was, I think, close to 80 years old. First African safari, and we had the most memorable time under the sun. We shot very good old animals, and he just had an absolute ball, appreciating every single moment we had. So anyway, we saw this bull the day before. We got into position, and they hadn't seen us, they hadn't spooked, but just casually grazed along the opposite ridge line away from us. Get back to lodge that day. I'm like, Mark, tomorrow morning, we're up early, before sunrise. We're getting there, getting into position, and making sure we get ourselves onto those females. Got there extremely early, about an hour before dawn. Put my trackers on the opposite hillside. We stayed on this hillside, glassing down to the left of us into this valley. And the trackers actually picked up on the bull's movement just below us. So we were looking in the distance when the bull and the females were just below us right here. Got Mark into position, sunk it, first shot, no issue. Drove the truck around straight to the bull, and we loaded him up. What an incredible hunt. But that's where planning became such an essential part of hunting these spiral dawn animals, because of how their behaviors are. And that I learned from different advice from older generational PHs, but also just time in the bush, time understanding that, okay, well, if they are going to stay generally territorial with their females, those opportunities become few and far between. If we had spooked that herd out the night before, God knows where they might have been. They could have been out of that valley on a different hillside somewhere else, and we would have never picked up on that same herd. But being patient, being precise, being planningful. I understand there's different scenarios, last day safaris and all that sort of stuff. I understand that. But generally speaking, it's worked incredibly well for me. And yeah, just putting in the time. Sometimes it just takes those small gaps of patience and appreciation and understanding of the animal to make those memorable moments a lot more significant out there. Because I remember that hunt. It happened 3-4 years ago. Mark remembers that hunt, I'm sure. And it's just such a special... It's a very special way on how everything unfolds. So, 10% luck, 90% planning. Always remember that. Might not work for you, but it definitely work for me. Cape buffalo. I guess it just had to be there. I promise you now, when people ask me, oh, what's your favorite animal to hunt? Generally speaking, most professional hunters, I'm sure, say Cape buffalo because of the adrenaline rush and the sheer power of the animal diving down into your truck or something like that. There's always been a scary story around some of the big five. And I guess that's what a lot of people chase, which is cool. But for me, it hasn't been about that. The lessons I've learned from Cape buffalo have been hard, not because of their harsh personality, but because of the hyped scenario it puts your clients in. I think a lot of clients, when they come out to South Africa and they are hunting anything of the big five or any part of the dangerous game, I think it makes the moment a hell of a lot more overwhelming. So I think I've spoken about this hunt before. It was with Ramon Haycock. He came out with his dad. It was a very special hunt for me because his dad nailed a buffalo in the first 2 days, I think it was. The first day we went around, we shot a beautiful lechwe, and then hunted buffalo. And his dad got a stunning bull. And myself and Ramon were after this particular bull in this massive herd of buffalo in this river section of the farm. And we just couldn't quite get onto them. Every time we would, they would bust out. They were wild. They were extremely alert herd of buffalo, and it was a big herd too. So the minute you bust one, the whole herd breaks out, and there'll be 4 or 5 riverbeds over before you even get closer. But what I learned from that is that being humble in defeat is a very important aspect to be able to walk away from. And to break down what I mean by that is, there were so many moments that I should have pulled out but kept pursuing because I didn't want to give up, that if I had pulled out in those moments might have led to better opportunities in the future, because I've slowly started doing that more and more often. So what I mean by that is that there were a number of times where we came up onto this group of buffalo and they would bust us. We would have a bust stalk, get into position, wouldn't have the bull in sight, and by trying to maneuver into a position of sight, we would create a distraction and those bulls would see us and set sail again. So for me, it was learning that when you are in position, take your time, wait, study what is going on, study when the animals start getting agitated, when your opportunity of window is to move, and move with that window. Don't rush the process of getting into position and shooting the correct animal. Wait for the animal to give you the opportunity to move into position and then taking the animal. But what I also learned is that when those bust stalks happened and those buffalo would move, generally speaking, a couple of yards down the line, is not to pressurize those animals, and rather pull away from the situation and reevaluate your positioning and try another. But I became to, time started getting the best of me. We were down to 3 or 4 days just before they were leaving. So I was pressured by time, and I was pressured by frustration in myself and from the client. I could see the client was frustrated. But at the same sense, we knew that this was going to be a difficult hunt. And what kept happening is the window period of opportunity started to become shorter and shorter with every bust stalk, with every pressured scenario. That window of opportunity was narrowing down extremely tight. So it got to a point where any crack of the twig, any shake of a leaf, those animals were gone, regardless whether they saw us or not. It was just a situation of... It led to a poorly placed shot. High on the shin, grazed just the muscle, enough to split the skin and for blood to seep out. Not blood dripping on the floor, but just to seep out of that wound and actually harden on the shoulder of the buffalo, or on the, what would you call it, the upper limb of the buffalo, just above the shin line there. And because those window periods were now so tight of us having opportunities, the shot happened with 2 days to go before they left. The day before they left, we got into position and we got another opportunity. And the buffalo, we were subsequently in the middle of no man's land, in the middle of this grassy field, and the buffalo were in the trees. They actually broke out from the tree line, saw us, stopped and turned, and with that, I saw the shimmer of blood on the shoulder from the sun. I saw that happen, and when I saw the dry blood, I was like, Ramon, that's the bull, shoot. And he did. He placed a beautiful shot on the shoulder, didn't drop it there and then, but we had to put in another 2 or 3 shots after that because we didn't want to lose that animal. So the hunt ended extremely successful. It was a moment that I've savored for the rest of my life, just embracing the sheer, what would I say, the sheer determination in myself and the hunter in trying to find this bull, make sure it's an ethical kill. We could sense that the windows of opportunity were getting narrower and that we had to make do with what we had and put our skills and patience to the test. And so we did. and it paid off extremely well. What I learned from that is patience is everything. I think we would have got into a much better position more times if we didn't pressure the animals as much as what we did. I mean, there were times we were crossing hillsides, scaling rock faces. It was gnarly. And since that day, I've learned so much. And how I hunt buffalo now is because of that particular hunt. That season, I had hunted successfully over 15 bulls, and all based on those principles. And I'm truly, truly grateful for that. So, yeah, those are the lessons I learned from the Black Death. And although it does get a bit gnarly and hair-raising sometimes, I can see why people chase that adrenaline spike. But for me, it's more about the lessons learned in the hunt on Cape Buffalo. I'm not a big Cape Buffalo fan hunting-wise. It is an animal I would pursue in the future, but it's not my favorite animal to hunt. I'll be honest with that. I love the spiraled horn challenge, but it's an animal that's taught me a hell of a lot, and I'm truly grateful for that. So, guys, that's it. That's my top 5 animals that have taught me everything I know in the bush today, and I hold on to that dearly. I hold on to those hunts very dearly. There's been plenty of scenarios out there that I hold on to, but lessons learned, those are my top 5 animals. So these animals have shaped how I hunt today, not because of the trophies, but because of the lessons they have left behind. The animals that teach you the most are really the easiest ones you hunt, and that is so true. I'm truly grateful for the lessons I've learned, and it's molded me into a professional hunter I'm extremely proud of today. So, if you're coming out on your very first safari, understand that and appreciate that there might be some hard lessons, but ones that will last for a lifetime. Make sure you don't make the same mistakes twice, and understand that appreciating the small lessons and understand by appreciating the mistakes, you get to learn some valuable life lessons for your hunting career, for your hunting experience, and in life. A lot to bite there. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of the podcast. Remember, this episode is sponsored by Kuficha. If you guys haven't yet, go along to check any of my social media platforms. DM me if you want to have any conversation regarding anything out there. I appreciate the interactions I have had, from the tipping episode to the gifting episode to everything. It's been a ball. I love it. I absolutely love it. So thank you so much to those that have asked the questions, and keep them coming. Share and send your safari adventures for 2026. I'm looking forward to it. We start on the 15th of this month, which is it's the 8th today, which is in 7 days' time. Exciting times. Like always, guys, if you are, happy hunting. Until then, stay safe, stay blessed, stay humble. Catch up with you guys soon.